The hungry widow wasn't asking for money. She was begging for one piece of bread to keep her little boy alive. 20 men kept eating, but one mountain man quietly pushed away his own plate. What happened after that single act of kindness changed an entire frontier town forever. Stay until the end, because this story proves that the smallest sacrifice can create the greatest miracle. Before we begin, please like this video and subscribe to the channel. Every like helps us share more heartwarming Wild West stories where kindness, courage, and love always triumph over greed and despair. The smell of fresh stew drifted through the Silver Creek Saloon as ranchers laughed around crowded wooden tables, their bowls full and their mugs never empty. Outside, winter winds swept dust through the quiet streets of the struggling frontier town, where not everyone was fortunate enough to have food waiting inside. Near the fireplace sat a broad, shouldered mountain man wrapped in a weathered buckskin coat. His beard was touched with frost, his boots worn from weeks of crossing lonely mountain trails. He had trapped furs, chopped timber, and survived storms that would have broken most men. Today, after nearly a week of hard travel, the bowl of beef stew before him was the only proper meal he had seen in days. Before lifting his spoon, he quietly bowed his head to give thanks. Just then, the saloon doors creaked open, and every conversation slowly faded. A young widow stepped inside, clutching the trembling hand of her little son. Their clothes were torn, their faces pale with hunger, and the boy's eyes remained fixed on the warm bread, sitting on nearby tables. The woman swallowed her pride with every step she took. She stopped in the middle of the crowded room, her voice barely louder than a whisper. "Please, my children are starving." Nobody answered. A rancher looked away. A gambler continued eating. Another man stared into his mug as though he had heard nothing at all. The widow lowered her head, ashamed that desperation had forced her to beg. "We haven't eaten in 2 days," she said, tears filling her eyes. If anyone could spare just a little bread. Her little boy tugged gently at her sleeve. "Mama, I'm so hungry." Those words cut deeper than any knife. Still, no one moved. Some feared they would be asked for more. Others convinced themselves someone else would help. Only the mountain man watched quietly from the corner. Without saying a word, he lifted his bowl of steaming stew, placed the loaf of fresh bread beside it, and walked across the room. He knelt so his eyes met the frightened little boy's. "Looks to me like this supper belongs to someone else." The child looked at his mother before reaching for the bread. Tears streamed down the widow's face. "Sir, I can't take your meal." The mountain man smiled gently. "I've gone hungry before." He looked toward the boy. "He shouldn't have to?" The widow shook her head. "Then what will you eat?" The mountain man simply tipped his hat. Kindness fills a man's heart longer than food fills his stomach. The boy eagerly took his first bite of bread while the widow quietly whispered a prayer of gratitude. Around the saloon, spoons stopped halfway to waiting mouths. For the first time that evening, the room fell completely silent. 20 well-fed men watched one hungry stranger give away the only meal he possessed. None of them realized they were about to witness something far greater than charity. They were about to discover how one selfless act can awaken the goodness hidden inside an entire community. The little boy held the warm loaf of bread as though it were the greatest treasure he had ever seen. His trembling hands broke off a small piece and offered it to his mother before taking a bite himself. The widow tried to smile, but tears rolled freely down her cheeks. Around the saloon, the laughter had vanished. The clinking of forks against bowls stopped. Every eye followed the mountain man as he quietly returned to his empty table. He had given away everything he had to eat, yet there was no regret on his face. He simply poured himself a cup of water and thanked God for another day alive. The saloon owner, an older man named Samuel, stared at the untouched place where the mountain man's supper had once been. He had served meals for 30 years and had seen wealthy men boast about generosity while giving almost nothing. Yet this stranger, who clearly owned little more than the clothes on his back, had quietly surrendered his last meal without expecting thanks. Samuel slowly walked into the kitchen. Moments later, he returned carrying another bowl of hot stew. He gently placed it before the mountain man. "This one's on the house. he said. The mountain man smiled politely but shook his head. Feed someone else who needs it more. Samuel looked toward the widow and her son. They're already eating because of you. Before the mountain man could answer, something unexpected happened. A rancher stood up and carried an entire loaf of bread to the widow's table. Another man brought fresh vegetables from his saddlebag. The blacksmith quietly laid several silver coins beside the boy's plate. A traveling doctor promised to examine the family without charging a penny. Even the rough gambler who had first ignored the widow removed his heavy winter blanket and wrapped it around the little boy's shoulders. No one spoke loudly. No one sought attention. They simply followed the example set by one humble stranger. The widow covered her face as emotion overwhelmed her. "Why?" she whispered. "Why are you all helping now?" Samuel answered softly, "Because one man reminded us who we were supposed to be." The mountain man lowered his eyes, uncomfortable with praise. "Don't thank me," he said quietly. "Thank the Lord for giving every person the chance to choose kindness." The boy finished his meal and walked over to the mountain man with a shy smile. "Mister, you can have half my bread." The stranger laughed gently. "No, son." "But you fed me." The mountain man placed a hand on the child's shoulder. "Then someday when you see someone hungry, you feed them." The little boy nodded with all the seriousness his young heart could hold. "I promise." Those simple words touched everyone in the room more deeply than they expected. The sheriff, who had entered quietly during the commotion, witnessed everything without interrupting. He removed his hat and addressed the crowd. "This town has spent too many years looking after only itself. That ends today." He announced that unused supplies from the town storehouse would be shared with struggling families until winter passed. Volunteers immediately offered wagons, firewood blankets, and livestock feed. Before long, names filled an entire ledger of people willing to help neighbors in need. The widow looked at the mountain man with grateful eyes. "You didn't just save my children today," she said. "You saved this town from becoming cold inside." The mountain man smiled as the lantern light reflected across the crowded room. "Sometimes," he replied, "a full stomach feeds the body. But one act of kindness can feed an entire community's soul." And as snow began falling softly outside, warmth spread through the saloon in a way no fireplace ever could. The following morning, the streets of Silver Creek looked different. The cold wind still swept through the frontier town, but something had changed inside the people who lived there. Ranchers who had once hurried past struggling neighbors now stopped to ask if anyone needed firewood. Storekeepers quietly left sacks of flour on the porches of widows before sunrise. The blacksmith repaired broken wagon wheels without charging families who had fallen on hard times. It all began with one mountain man who had been willing to go hungry so a child could eat. Meanwhile, the nameless stranger prepared to leave town. His horse was saddled, his worn blanket rolled behind the saddle, and his empty food pouch hung from the leather straps. He expected nothing in return for what he had done. As far as he was concerned, helping someone in need was simply part of being a decent man. Before he could ride away, the widow came running with her little boy beside her. This time, their faces were no longer pale with hunger. The boy clutched a small cloth package in his hands. "Mama made this for you," he said shyly. Inside were fresh biscuits, smoked meat, and a small piece of homemade pie. The mountain man smiled warmly but gently pushed the bundle back. "You've only just begun to recover. Keep it for yourselves." The widow shook her head. "Yesterday you taught my son that kindness should never stop with receiving. Please let him learn what it means to give." The mountain man accepted the bundle with grateful eyes. "Then I will honor his gift." The little boy stepped closer and wrapped his small arms around the stranger's waist. "When I grow up," he whispered, "I want to be a man like you." The mountain man's eyes softened. "No, son, be even better." Those words stayed with everyone who heard them. Just then, the saloon owner, the sheriff, the blacksmith, ranchers, merchants, and nearly every townsperson gathered along the street. Samuel carried a sturdy leather saddlebag filled with dried food, coffee, blankets, and supplies for the mountain man's journey. "This isn't payment," Samuel said. "It's gratitude." The sheriff stepped forward next. No one knows your name, friend. The mountain man smiled beneath the brim of his weathered hat. A name isn't important. Then how should we remember you? The widow asked. He looked around at the smiling faces that had once been strangers afraid to help. Don't remember me, he answered quietly. Remember what kindness can do. With that he climbed into the saddle. As he rode toward the distant mountains, the little boy waved until the rider disappeared beyond the hills. Years passed, but the story of the nameless mountain man never faded. Travelers spoke of Silver Creek as the town where no hungry child was ever turned away. Every evening, the saloon kept one warm meal waiting for any stranger who needed it. The townspeople called it the mountain man's table. No questions were asked. No payment was expected. If someone was hungry, they were fed. If someone was cold, they were given a blanket. If someone had lost hope, they found it there. The mountain man was never seen in Silver Creek again, but his greatest gift had never been the meal he surrendered. It was the compassion he awakened in ordinary people. The people finally understood that generosity is not measured by how much we have. It is measured by how much we are willing to share. And from that day forward, one simple truth echoed across the Wild West. A single act of selfless kindness can feed far more than an empty stomach. It can nourish an entire community's heart for generations. If this story touched your heart, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who believes kindness is the greatest strength a person can possess. Until next time, remember, the richest people are often those who give away the most.